more.
Yeah, I'd be brooding too
Class.
if I had to live in Iceland and had no woman whatsoever.
Are we
So
live?
kind of like now.
Are we what? We're live?
Very cool.
Good job, Aaron.
Hi, welcome to the world of cinematics. It's good to have you guys all back.
Yeah, sorry about the delay and our awkward start here. Robert is indisposed at the moment, so we've been trying to figure out how to broadcast from Zoom on our end, and it's been a struggle. I'm nowhere as literate when it comes to these things as Robert is.
None of us are.
Robert, you were wonders, please come back to us.
Yeah, he left us for Panda Express.
Hey, Panda Express is taking him from us. They're coming here, and he's the lone maiden on a stormy night, just praying for a sailor to come, or her sailor to come home.
Yeah, it's not even a Klondike bar, Robert.
That's
Well,
true. And it's not how it feels when you chew 5 gum.
No. All right, so let's get this show belatedly on the road. Today we're talking about Lord of the Rings. We're closing out our Lord of the Rings month. We're talking about it specifically as an adaptation of the Tolkien novels. I know this is something that Brendan, on my left here, is very, very passionate about. If I'm correct, Stefan and Aaron have not read the books, correct?
That's correct. I've read passages, but I haven't read the whole trilogy.
I read Boromir's death, and I also read this part in the Battle of Helm's Deep because I thought it's a battle. It should be interesting. It was like 3 or 4 pages about a spear, where it started, where it went, and where it eventually ended up.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that was riveting.
Yeah, there's lots of long passages that are not the most exciting. I first read them when I was 10, I believe.
Bravo.
But I last read them when I was a senior in high school, so it's been a while. Brendan has definitely read them most recently out of us.
I listened to them, yes. I don't think I could read and understand them. But listening to it, just listening to somebody explain it to you is easier. If you're reading something, you can read a line and read it, and then you're like, what did I just read? And you have to go back. But when it's just narrated to you, it just steamrolls past everything, so you just kind of pick it up easier. I do.
Sure.
So not that matters, but yes, I listen to it.
Okay. So as the closest thing to an expert amongst us,
Oh,
even
yeah.
our Tolkien scholars, because
Not
they're
at all.
definitely scholars.
Yeah.
How would you, I guess starting off at the beginning, Fellowship of the Ring, how would you consider that as an adaptation of the Tolkien work?
I would say the movie did a really, really good job overall. There's just so much detail. I mean, Tolkien's world is just rich with detail that we cannot put into a 3-hour movie.
Right.
Though there are parts in all the movies that aren't in the books, which you're like, well, why didn't they just put the parts that were in the books in that extra time rather than making new stuff up that never happened?
Yeah.
But with the story they were telling, I think they hit the most important points, and that's kind of my opinion. Like the Tom Bombadil, not essential to the story.
Right. Tolkien is famously a linguist, one of the greatest linguists of our time, and he started this story, long before it was even a story, created multiple different languages as a thought exercise. I'm not quite sure. Then after creating those languages, he wanted it to be realistic, so he created a world that would fit, the origins and the evolution of those languages. And then from that, he said, well, if I created languages in a world, I should probably create a story too. Yeah, let's kind of do, classic stories, archetypes, and all that stuff. This is really a vessel to get all this language out. That's the important part. And I think it's very interesting, because all that just translated into world building that was, unmatched in terms of the time. There are other series and franchises that have similar world building, but it took like 50 years for Star Wars to come along. It took I don't know, 30. No, Lord of the Rings came out in the 50s, right?
I believe that's right.
It took like 10 years for Marvel to start publishing, So there are other things, but this was very much ahead of its time. And, the story isn't the most complicated. It's, this classic hero's journey with a lot of different things thrown in. But, with how dense the originals were with all of the world building, all of the little nooks and crannies, all of the things that maybe are there to get across themes or language rather than story and character, did have to be cut away. I mean, most famously for Fellowship of the Ring, I think, is probably Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
I don't know, Brandon, what do you think of Tom Bombadil?
I like him. He's cool and all that, but he kind of, like I said,
100% derails story.
yeah. I mean, he puts on the ring. I don't know if, like, you know this. I think I told you guys. He puts on the ring. It doesn't do anything to him. It doesn't turn invisible. So your first reaction is like, oh my gosh, is this guy more powerful than Gandalf? Is he more powerful than Sauron? And he just stays in his little hut the whole time. And even during the Council of Elrond, they're talking and talking and talking, and that's a lot longer in the book too.
Yeah.
But they ask about Tom Bombadil. Well, you think he'll help Gandalf? And he said, no, I don't think he will. He's kind of doing his own thing.
Yeah.
Not that he's going to be going against our plans or anything. He's not going to help the enemy either.
Yeah.
He's just not going to help. And I was just like, he really could be cut, and it wouldn't change anything. That's when I was like, oh.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Tom Bombadil is a character that the four hobbits run across from after they've left Hobbiton, before they even meet Aragorn. This is the portion of the movie where they're trying to stay hidden from the Black Rider who's chasing them. They are running through the forest, and they have a brief interlude where they meet this random guy named Tom Bombadil, who has a wife who's a river spirit of some sort. It's not explained, that's not important. Just like everything else in Tom Bombadil. He is there to show the symbolism behind he is not affected by the ring. So he's not corrupted, is sort of his religion coming out saying like, hey, the world is fallen, men are weak, all this stuff. Every once in a while there's something that's perfect, but that's not important. The rest of it is, the world is fallen, men are weak. And it's very interesting thematically. No reason to have it in the movie. I know there are a lot of Tolkien purists who disagree, but you're wrong.
I mean, I'm kind of spoiled because I saw the movies first, and I grew up with those. That was Lord of the Rings to me until recently. So to me, Tom Bombadil is, I see how Peter Jackson spoke of him. He's just like, oh, he's the guy we don't need. He's not essential to the plot. And I think it was one of the actors, I think it was the actor for Saruman, was like, but you have to have him, But Peter Jackson's like, no, we don't, not really. I mean, the ring's still going to get destroyed with or without Tom Bombadil.
When you watch the features, what they always go back to when they talk about the adaptation, especially in Fellowship, or even in all of them really, it's how is this about Frodo and the ring? How is this about that journey and getting to Mount Doom? How does this progress Frodo and the ring? And everything really supports that at the end of the day. It's like, how does Aragorn fighting at Helm's Deep support Frodo and the ring? Or Merry and Pippin rallying the Ents to go fight? How does that support Frodo and the ring in that journey? And that, again, Council of Elrond, very different in the book. I read some of it, and I said, wow, this is really long. And
right. We don't need to hear Gimli's backstory for that portion.
Right, and we don't, there's so much stuff that we don't need. But at the end of the day, it's how is this about Frodo and the ring?
Right.
Because that's the central story. That's what, if you take all the weeds out, you say, what is this about? It's about Frodo and the ring and getting it out to Mount Doom. And they managed to condense Council of Elrond to say, okay, this is what this is about. It's about getting that ring out there and Frodo putting his foot down, standing up and saying, I will take it.
Right.
And, all those all those other details, Tom Bombadil and everything else notwithstanding.
Hello.
Robert.
No, I'm here. What's going on? What I missed?
Hello.
We're talking about Lord of the Rings as an adaptation. We just finished talking about Tom Bombadil, talking about the Council of Elrond now.
I actually heard everything.
Everything.
Everything. I was watching a live stream, and someone needs to mute their mic, unless you guys already did. Did you already do it? It looks like you did.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah,
Hi, everybody. I'm here.
Hi.
Hi.
Picking up off of where Stefan left off, I wouldn't describe the things that were taken out as picking through the weeds. It's more of a those are a lot of spices in the dish. There's a lot of great flavor that you can really explore in the longer time frame that a novel has. Maybe if Lord of the Rings was a series, we could have gone some of that stuff. Like I imagine the Council of Elrond would have been a full 45-minute to an hour episode.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a movie, a long movie, but it's maybe 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, I would add to that. It's maybe more of a banquet.
Yeah.
Because there are some things that when I read through Tolkien, I don't care as much about. When they talk about in the Council of Elrond about the necromancer from The Hobbit, that's interesting to me. But that might not be interesting Brendan, might not be interesting Stefan. It could be.
Makes the world feel more lived in.
Yeah.
It does a great job of establishing tone. But film being a different medium, you can do that without saying anything. Your shots, music, all that does that.
Exactly. So maybe not weeds, maybe not herbs, but just hors d'oeuvres.
I definitely call them weeds.
It's definitely what they would
In a film standpoint, they are weeds because
Absolutely.
they don't add flavor. They slow things down,
Mhm.
and they're nauseous, and they get in the way.
Yeah.
And it's part of the reason why I didn't enjoy Dune, because I didn't understand that they were giving me too many weeds, and I'm like, this is too much. I can't take this all in. But then when I understood what that was more about, I was able to say, okay, it's better than I actually thought it would be. But if Lord of the Rings performed with that many details, that many weeds, then, like you said, in a book standpoint, it's like, absolutely, you can have the time to do this and world build and have these details and have your Tom Bombadils and what have you. And your Old Man Willow, is that the tree that they get stuck in, or is that a different name?
Yeah, it's Old Man Willow. That's a tree that got stuck in.
Yeah, you can have that, and they do.
Old Man Willow, I know his song.
In the extended edition of Two Towers, they sort of have that, but they don't call him that. But when you have a book, you can do that. But when it's a movie, you've got to trim the fat, like big time, especially in something where the extended edition is like 4.5 hours and regular cuts 3 hours. So.
And even then, those are the theatrical is the barest of bare bones. And the extended edition has more time to breathe, a little more world building, character stuff, but it's still very much we're keeping the essential scenes from the books.
Yeah. So when you have the luxury of a book, obviously that's 500 pages long as the Bible or whatever. Yeah, you can do that. But as a film, not so much.
Well, and see, that's where people would disagree. I don't, because I agree trimming the fat.
Right.
But in a media sense, people could argue that having a combination of all those things, whether it's said, sung, because there's a lot of songs in these books, which they've cut out most. I think there might be one or two in the actual movies.
Yeah, the movies are more references to the songs rather than
Like every once in a while, somebody will have a line of dialogue that's like the name of the chapter, or you'll hear Bilbo start to sing a song as he walks away. That's the majority of it until Pippin's song in Return of the King.
Exactly.
Is that taken from the books?
I listened to all those books and I was waiting for that song to show up.
Mhm.
I can't say I remember ever hearing it.
Okay.
And
So it's possible you missed it, but unlikely.
I might have, but I was waiting for it. It's the third book. That's the one I was waiting for. But I never heard it, so I was like, did they just make that up, or was it taken from some other work that Tolkien wrote somewhere else?
That could be.
So I really should have looked into that more because it's always made me curious.
There's a really
Which
good job of if it was original, adapting the style of those songs.
Yeah. And if they do the songs, they always cut it in half. They're not going to do the full song. Actually, the song in The Hobbit with the dwarf singing Man in the Moon himself came down.
Yeah.
In the
That's
first
in,
Hobbit.
the Fellowship.
That's
of the
in
Ring.
Fellowship of the Ring. Frodo sings that in the Prancing Pony.
Yeah, I was gonna mention
It
that.
does have more songs.
And then Frodo falls over, and that's when he gets the ring on his finger.
Mhm.
Or I don't remember if it falls from the sky like it did in the movie, but that's
No, he
that's-
had his hand in his pocket and he fell.
oh yeah,
that's
that's
right.
right. That's
I
right.
actually just listened to that chapter a day ago.
There you go.
Yeah. When he was singing that song, I was like, oh my gosh, that's the song. They used this song for The Hobbit. So it's kind of cool that they did that for The Hobbit, because The Hobbit obviously did not have as much content as The Lord of the Rings.
They did that in the animated version of Lord of the Rings.
They did.
Frodo does
Yeah.
sing in the Prancing Pony.
Mhm.
To all those fans who like the details, that's totally fine. But films, there's only three mediums I could think of off the top of my head where that works to have as many details as Tolkien has.
Mhm.
One is the books. Two is some kind of audio presentation. You could definitely get away with a lot more details there, or a TV show. And that's pretty much it. A film where you'll make profit, where you make money. You gotta cut a lot of stuff in order to do that.
Well, yeah, and there's a limited budget, time frame, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, to validate what Stefan was saying about trimming the fat for movies, that is more than acceptable. I mean, there's 7 Harry Potter books, which they made into 8 movies. So, you can do that, but it's not always likely.
And I feel like that especially applies to Lord of the Rings because they have, unlike Harry Potter, they have this huge extended lore.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And Peter Jackson has to cut down, but also reference some of that lore that is important. So he's got this whole jigsaw puzzle of stuff he needs to cut through. Jed, you had something?
Oh, I was going to say, picking off of where Brendan was talking about with the ring and when Frodo wears the ring for the first time. That's also the scene where we're introduced to Aragorn, right?
Mhm.
This is one of the things that for me is actually an improvement over the books. Not just it was good to leave this out or change in the adaptation. I think this is a net positive 100% gain over the books. Aragorn in the books, he is filled with a lot of doubts, just like he is in the movies. In the books, his doubts are, I don't know if I can protect them along the way. I don't know if I'm good enough, skilled enough, cool enough, whatever, to get them over there. He doesn't doubt himself at all, like, oh yeah, I can be king, I'm the rightful king, sure, whatever. I'm not going to reveal it to everyone, I can do that, yeah. In the movies, it's of course I can get them over there. I'm skilled enough. I've lived in these lands. I've lived long enough. I know how to do this. But I doubt my moral character. I doubt myself. Like I'm going to fall to the same weaknesses and foibles as my ancestor. To me, external conflict is great. Internal conflict is much more important to me. So the idea that he doubts himself as a person, not as a warrior or a ranger. That's much more interesting to me.
Yeah, that's true. So, go ahead.
I was just gonna say he's really old, so why he would be doubting himself as a warrior? That's that's kind of against what we've seen, especially with dwarves and elves who live hundreds of years, and they're great warriors. So I agree with what Jed's saying. It's way more interesting when the internal conflict is. Yeah. Am I worthy enough, or am I going to be more like my ancestor?
And don't get me wrong, this idea of I'm very sure who I am, I'm confident of myself, can still be compelling.
Sure.
Like in the animated version of Lord of the Rings, that's much more accurate to the book depiction of Aragorn. That line that John Hurt says, I'll always love it. Like don't get me wrong, if I wanted the ring, I could have it now. And don't get me wrong, this idea of I'm very sure who I am.
Hey, sorry, we were hearing the ghost of Jedediah's past.
One of us needs to keep talking, whether it's one of us or Robert.
Gotcha. So no silence. That
That was me. That's my bad.
Okay. You need the necromancer here and summoning.
Sorry. I meant to call an orc, not a redhead.
Every time you have Panda Express, you summon spirits. So.
Oh.
Back to the books.
Back to the books.
Going off what Jed was saying, it is definitely an improvement with Aragorn because it's like, okay, you're 87 years old. why haven't you taken the throne if you're Mr. I'm so sure I could take it? Go take it, dude. Things would be way better if you did. Go do it. But the fact that in the films he hesitates, it's like, I've got the same problems as my ancestors, if it could corrupt my fathers, am I much better than them? And it's not like Isildur was just some bad guy.
No, he was wonderful. He was a great king.
And, he did his best and he vanquished Sauron, but then he fell to temptation. It's kind of like the story of King David very much. So another thing that's different than from the book, and I just want to get everyone's point of view on it, is the inclusion of Arwen, and it goes to the later films. Her inclusion is, I'd argue, more important in Fellowship than the other two in the films. But just her inclusion, how she's the elf that shows up to take Frodo instead of some random elf nobody ever hears again. In the cartoon, I should say animated film, it's Legolas, which is totally fine. But what do we all think of Arwen, her inclusion specifically in Fellowship and then later going into the other films? What do you guys think of that?
So I think it's smart because they were planning to use her for the rest of the films. Just because with some random elf, Glufindel, it doesn't add much to the story. It's like the Tom Bombadil, at least for me. Because if we have a love interest with Aragorn, then we have more stakes. If it's just some random elf riding with Frodo all the way to Rivendell, we'll be scared for, Frodo, but we're not going to be scared for the elf. Not as much, at least. If it's Legolas, then we do build more off his character.
I think that I went back and looked this last week. Arwen in the original books has two scenes. She's at the Council of Elrond, during which she says nothing, and she shows up to Aragorn's coronation, and she has one line. It's hard to buy Aragorn's motivations with her if we never get to see them, interact and have that. So while I do think it was better than Glorfindel to have her rescue Frodo, I think the bigger improvement or change was to have him and her interact a lot more, whether it's through flashbacks or just seeing them together, but then also see her interact with her father, because then that trifecta, the three of them, it adds a lot more drama and conflict to them that then pays off even more when it's resolved in Return of the King.
I agree. And Stefan mentioned Fellowship of the Ring. Her inclusion is better. Is that what you said?
Not better per se, just that she has a bigger role,
Notable.
a more notable role.
Okay.
She does something.
Because I was going to say Two Towers, I think, has the flashbacks are even more important. Just because it builds off of the, why isn't Aragorn going for Eowyn? Thank you. And we see what the motivation is. Otherwise, he kind of looks like a jerk. Especially if you haven't seen the first film. Then, and if you wanted to cut that, all the flashbacks with her, or them kissing on the bridge scene, just in case it shows Glorfindel or whatever, then at least the second film, you have all the flashbacks, and it shows the motivation for him and why he's not with Eowyn.
The film doesn't go deep enough to establish that he should be with her, and he never rejects her. Technically, in that one, it's in Return of the King where that actually happens.
Right. But as a trilogy, it builds off of each other.
Sure.
I think it's essential.
What I'm saying is she takes an active role. I didn't say it was less.
Right. I was saying if you did say that.
No, not at all. My take on it, I was talking to somebody about just Lord of the Rings, and they said, I only watched the first one. I didn't enjoy it very much. And I said, okay, that's interesting. There's very few people I met who could say that. I said, what's wrong with it? They're like, there's no romance. Like, they go from, and they must have, I've never seen the original cut, so I don't know how much there is. But she's like, they go from one monster, one ugly thing to another monster and to another ugly thing and on and on. There's not enough romance for me to just sit there and be like, oh, this is wonderful. Just watching these monsters chasing people. And so I thought that was a very interesting perspective, and having the romance in there at all, I think helps certain audience members to be like, okay, I can sit through this because there's something beautiful, there's something nice, there's something romantic,
Right.
versus, oh, here's another hideous creature or shrieking beast that's
That's not how I would describe Viggo Mortensen.
No,
there
there's
were
definitely how
some
you describe Andy
scenes
Serkis.
It's Gimli.
Arwen and Arwen in the first movie, but it's nothing compared to the extended edition.
Right.
Most of their relationship was fleshed out in flashbacks in Two Towers.
Okay, so in the original cut for all
Yeah,
that.
so you see them interacting when she brings Frodo to Rivendell. You see them interacting when Aragorn is putting the sword back. And then she briefly on a bridge says, like, hey, I want to stay with you. That's about it.
Yeah, and it wasn't enough for this person to justify.
Was this
watching-
person a girl?
Yes. It wasn't enough for them to justify watching it, could keep watching the series because they weren't interested in the monsters or the inner conflict of the ring. And I said, you know what, that's fair enough. From a guy standpoint, I'm like, I could live with or without it. But it is important to people, and the fact that they were willing to do that, not just from Jed's side, which is the conflict side, and also the drama side, making it more interesting that way. But people like watching romance, specifically women. They like it, and it's important to include that. That way, they have something they can watch that's nice. And I would argue there's a lot of nice things in Lord of the Rings.
And I will say, I understand, wanting more romance in a movie. I mean, personally, I think we have, especially recently, had a dearth of good romances in blockbuster movies. But I still like those movies. It's not the only thing I'm looking for. But if somebody else, if that's the primary thing they're looking for, I get it.
Yeah. So when you go into it and you're like, oh, knights, chivalry, ladies, and it's more monsters and stuff.
Right.
Maybe not so interesting to the female side of the audience. But there's plenty of people who get over that or who don't care.
Yeah.
Male and female.
And that's when I would recommend Baron and Luthien if you want to try out a Tolkien romance story with more of that chivalry and all that stuff, where it's centered around a forbidden love. That's the one you should try.
That's a good one. Actually, I have no idea what that one is.
Baron and Luthien is a story of an elf and a human who fell in love. It's touched on by Legolas in Fellowship of the Ring in the books. And Tolkien liked the story so much because it was semi-autobiographical story about him and his wife that he then wrote the story, and you can go read it.
That's cool.
It's what Aragorn's singing about. And Frodo asks him about it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, in that case, I'm pretty sure in the books, not in the third book, but in the appendices of the third book, it talks about the love story of Aragorn, which is actually a very beautiful story where he sees her for the first time, and he thinks that he compares her to an elf that's more beautiful and fair than any other elf, and I think it might be this elf. And he calls her that. He says, "Oh, Luthien," and she says, "Why do you call me this name? You do not know my name, and that is not my name." And he says, "But you are, as this elf that is told in these stories." And it's a very romantic story between these two, and I'm glad they put some of that in the movies, even though we didn't get that scene specifically, because he was like 20 at the time.
It's one of the few scenes that hasn't made it to an extended edition or deleted scene.
Really, they filmed their meeting together.
Peter Jackson talked about that at a convention a few years ago. Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. Well, and they meet, and he's just a young lad, and he loves her instantly. But even Elrond tells him, even the king of all men does not deserve this elf. He's like, oh yeah, that's fair. You got to earn her, sort of thing. So he goes out, and 20 years later or so, I don't remember. He's a lot older. He's not as handsome. He's a little grizzled. He's got scars and everything. He goes back to her, and I don't remember all the specifics, but I remember they make it work out.
King of two kingdoms, right?
Oh, I don't remember. It was
one is Gondor, obviously. The other was because there's only two kingdoms of men left. There's Gondor and Rohan. So I need to be king of Gondor.
Oh yeah,
there was
okay.
There was a third kingdom that had been destroyed that through technicality and bloodlines, he was also heir to that throne. I forget what it was called. Do you remember the name of it? You, Robert?
I do not.
I do not.
But
I think it was destroyed by the Witch King. I can't remember. I asked Robert because Robert is big in Lord of the Rings online, and I know that there was.
Wait, hold on. Ask the question again. I was checking something.
The third kingdom of men that was destroyed, because there's Gondor, there's Rohan, there's a third one that was destroyed a long time ago.
It's not the
The
Numenorians.
ruins of it's right there. Oh
Yeah,
no,
it's
No.
right there. I can't remember it.
it starts
Oh,
with
this
an A, I think.
Is it Angmar?
Yeah,
I don't-
no, not
Is it?
Angmar.
No.
I was gonna say
No.
that's the Witch King's.
Yeah, he was related to all that.
Yeah.
But anyways, he had to be the king of two kingdoms. He had to, go do all these very specific things. It's very much the trope of like, you must do these trials in order to do this. Whether it's the story of Jacob trying to win over Rebecca and Leah and all that, or whether it's the story of Hercules and his trials. It's a very archetypal thing.
yeah, it was a very cool story, and I really like how it ends with them together. And I thought it was really sad reading it that when Aragorn, what is that?
Numinous in
Oh.
Numinas.
Yeah, so he became king of,
City in
or he
Evidem.
was technically king of Anuminas.
Right.
Anuminas.
Numinous.
Yeah. I don't know what it's called. But the point I was getting at, their ending, when she dies, or when he dies, forgive me.
Just long in the future, he's like 300 when he dies.
Right, she still is living, and when I read that, it was super sad because he's like, "You should repent, lady, and go on a boat to carry you into the west." And she says, "I cannot, for there's no boat that will take me at this time." And I was like, "Oh, that's depressing. She's an elf. She's gonna live forever." But I actually read recently in Nature of the Middle Earth, this new book that has been put out that was pretty much the notes of Tolkien put together. And it says that as soon as the elves left Middle Earth, any elf that was left over was basically made mortal. So, and she specifically aged the same rate Aragorn did, and they were about the same age physically.
Yeah.
So
probably died when she's maybe 500, something like that.
so she's gonna die a little bit after him. So I was like, oh, he's not gonna live forever.
That somehow makes it better.
Yeah, it made me happy. I was like, oh, this is a better ending.
Yeah.
If you get to elf heaven eventually.
Yes, eventually. But yes, and to answer Stefan's question about Arwen, I think her inclusion in the movies is good because, like Aaron said, you can't have Aragorn, and like Jed said too, you can't have Aragorn just being this Superman character and having no conflicts. He's just totally, good, and he has all the right motives. He doesn't have any weaknesses or anything. But he's really, when the Fellowship splits up, Frodo's kind of the main character of the two, and Aragorn is the main character of Gimli and Legolas. Legolas and Gimli, if we're being honest, in the movies they don't have a whole lot of.
They're comedic relief mostly.
Yes. So Aragorn needs more to it, and in the books you know nothing about Arwen really until the third book. So adding her in the first movie and the second movie and third movie, I think that really, really helped out his part of the story when those three are together, and with Gandalf. I think that helped out a lot.
Okay, so we've been speaking about Fellowship of the Ring for a little over half hour.
Yes.
Are there any other changes we want to go over, or do we move on to the Two Towers?
I say we move
I
on.
think so. I think we covered the big ones.
Yeah, that's fair.
By the way, to correct myself, I'm pretty sure that other kingdom was in Fort Nost. It was Numenor.
Was
Numenor?
Okay.
Numenor. Yep.
There we go.
I guess that makes sense because he's
He does have that Numenorian blood. Yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Right.
because they started up there. That's kind of where that kingdom was, but then they migrated down.
Yeah.
And then in the books, they talk about the white tree burning one time, and then they moved over somewhere else, and then Gondor kind of traveled
Yeah.
until they found Minas Tirith.
Yeah.
Big difference with Two Towers book. The first big difference, book and film that I know of, is the beginning.
And
and the
then
end. Well, yeah, the beginning and the end, but
Which part of the
the
beginning?
the fact that Boromir dies
Right.
at the
Right.
beginning of the Two Towers.
Right.
versus we just start with Frodo and Sam and the taming of Schmeagol, which I'm pretty sure is early on in the book.
It's like the first. No, it's not the first chapter. It's the first chapter of the second half.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of the Frodo part.
Frodo and Sam have. Yes, that's true. I would say if we're jumping to character development, I think we talked about Aragorn last for the first book. I think for the second book, one of the biggest changes I noticed when listening to the books was King Theoden's change. Because in the book, as soon as he's freed from the spell of Saruman, he kind of does whatever he wants him to. He's like, hey, you should go to Helm's Deep. You should do this stuff. And Theoden's like all grateful. He's like, oh, yes, I will. Because you have saved me from this curse of Saruman, blah, 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 blah. But in the movie, he's just like, oh, well, we're going to go to Helm's Deep. And everyone in the movie is like, no, don't go to Helm's Deep. You're all going to get killed there. So that's another change. But, you know.
In the books, like many of the characters, he's an archetype. He's a caricature. And it's certainly done well. But in the movies, they're like, we want to make people more interested in this character. Let's give him more conflict. So he's the bitter, kind of cynical old man who's going to make a lot of the wrong decisions, so that people who are underneath him, like Aragorn, will have to say, this is wrong, but we have to follow you anyways.
That's exactly right.
Well, and it helps Gandalf not look like a bully, because that's kind of one of my biggest complaints about the Hobbit book. Is that Bilbo doesn't get much of a choice when he wakes up. Yeah, he kind of gets pushed into it. And I've listened to a little bit of Two Towers when Theoden is broken from the spell. And I wouldn't say he was bullied. He is more relieved. But I do agree that he has more agency in the movies because he's more relatable. His son has just died. You know, all these terrible things are happening. So it would make it a little more sense that he would be cynical because of all these terrible things. And his greatest ally, Saruman, has betrayed him. So it makes a little more sense.
Yeah, everyone in the book seems to trust Gandalf. Everyone.
Yeah.
And there's only one point.
People who are explicitly enemies of his.
Well,
Whether
exactly.
people like Denethor or Wormtongue.
Well, if somebody doesn't trust Gandalf, you know they're a bad guy.
They're a fool.
Or a fool. But in the third third book is the first time, I guess we see it in the movie too. But, and I'll save that for later, but you know, that's the first time we see Gandalf kind of lose that confidence. Because in the books, he's a man with a plan, especially when he's resurrected. He knows what he's going to do. He knows what he needs to do. He knows what everyone needs to do for this to work. And I'll just say, you know, in the third book, there's the point where the mouth of Saruman throws the mithril at him and says, I killed your hobbits. And that's the first time in the books he's just like, oh my goodness, like, this is all over. We might as well give up. Might as well become slaves. We're done. You know?
Like it's very much going off that religious idea of, you know, Gandalf is Christ in many ways, where prior to Christ's death, you know, he knew with, you know, perfect faith, okay, this is what I need to do, this is what I'm going to do, all this stuff. There's still that little apprehension of, if there's any way, I don't want to do this, like, if there's any way, you know, this stuff can be taken from me, please. But then after his resurrection, it's all like, I know everything, I'm going to do everything my way, this is the way, all of this. And Gandalf, that's, you know, he's imperfect, but essentially, you know, for the sake of the story, perfect before his death. And then when he's brought back, I know the way, follow me. And that doesn't break until the very, very end of the, you know, right before the biggest climax in book 3.
Oh, you know what really disappointed me? Maybe this is. I just grew up with the Aragorn cutting off the mouth's head. He doesn't do that.
No, doesn't do it.
I was waiting for it. I was like, they need to put this guy in his place. You know? He needs to be out of here.
It's the traditional thing of before battle. They send their commissaries, their boys, say, hey, let's discuss terms real quick.
Robert's gone.
No, I'm not gone. I just my mic. I'm standing at my desk to stand up because I'm tired of sitting.
Well, the other big change in the Two Towers, as I understand, and you can correct me, is it's another character change. It's Faramir. In the book, from what I understand, he didn't have nefarious purposes or the intent to build himself up in his father's eyes by presenting the ring to Denethor in the book. And he actually wasn't influenced, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's like, I have no desire for the ring.
So, and again, going back to, we got to make these not archetypes or just characters, is to say, well, what would a person whose brother is better favored and who's struggling to keep things together while your enemies are at your door, and who has a father who wants the ring for himself, and all those things
Why would
combining.
he want the ring?
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, you can make a motive and say, Faramir is just like any other guy. Because if you have yet another Tom Bombadil situation where it's like, it doesn't really do it for me, then it's like, well, this thing is pretty useless. You know, if there's two guys in a row that you meet within 2 books that have no interest in the ring of power, it's like,
Right.
well, it's not a very good ring, is it?
Yeah, and I have to say, for the films, it's interesting because he does get tempted, but never to the point of anyone else.
No, he doesn't want to take, well, he wants to bring it to his father, but he never goes to the lengths that Boromir does to take it.
Exactly. So I find it's a very good compromise. We see he's still imperfect, but it's because of how his father has mistreated him, and not because he wants the power.
Right. Everyone wants power for a different reason. Galadriel wants the power so that everyone sees how great she is.
Yeah.
You know, it's that thing in the back of their head that she had. Yeah, the ego that she has to constantly put in place, put it in its place. Otherwise, it will overwhelm her. Gandalf wants power to do good, and he does so, and he uses power to do good. But you know, through him, it would become evil. Aragorn wants, he wants power also to do good, but he also knows that there is something that could corrupt him for it. Faramir wants power to please his father and to, you know, make him proud of him and see him as the person of quality, and he is a person of quality that he is. And, you know, and Boromir wants to do it to save his people. Everyone who wants power, and I'd be surprised if there's anyone who would lie and say, no, power is not interesting to me. But if we're honest enough and say, yeah, power is out there, but it can corrupt me just as much as it can corrupt you or you or you. Anyone can be corrupted by it, and it's for different reasons. And I think that's very interesting that they looked at the different reasons that the ring could corrupt different people.
Right.
Their motives are all different.
I find it interesting that, you know, in the books, he doesn't want it at all. In the movies, he doesn't want it for himself.
No.
He wants it to give to his father. This is the ultimate gift to be, look, I'm the son who's able to do this when Boromir couldn't. It's not that he doesn't care about power. Here's what power can buy him later.
Right.
And after that, he doesn't care. But it's still that seed that we know would have led to his downfall.
Yeah. Absolutely. Any thoughts on that, Brandon?
I thought Robert was about to say something.
Oh, go for it, Robert.
It just that kind of reminded me, wasn't it? Didn't Abraham Lincoln say that we all have a price? Something about like that. He got in a fight.
May have.
He might have.
Well, was my history's getting mixed up now. But if I do
He's the
recall,
one who chopped down the cherry tree.
what? I thought he's the one that
was honest.
something.
He's the one that writes the bear.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Wow. He's the reason why Davy Crockett existed. But it seemed like that time, Eric. No, we're not talking about that. No, so someone was trying to bribe him with something, and he ended up throwing him out of a bar. I can't remember the whole entire story. All I know is that someone asked him why he did it, and he said they were getting closer to my price.
Oh, shoot.
So that's kind of the same thing with the ring, where it's like that little bit of power, like it gives you that price that you want, and you have to have the strength to say no.
Yeah.
And Faramir, his price was his father's love.
Yeah.
But even then,
Well said.
I think that's a good point. And even then, I think Boromir said, "I'm going to take the ring to save Gondor," and you can't blame the guy.
Yeah.
Gondor was on the brink of destruction, as you can see in the third movies. In the Fellowship of the Ring, you don't really know that because you're not there. He's been there. He's been at front lines. He's seen death. He's seen cities burn, you know, all that. But none of us know it until we get there. And then if you go back and think about what he was going through, you're like, oh, that makes sense. But we know the ring would corrupt him to the point where he'd kind of turn into a golem, I think. He would just leave his people, like Isildur, when his men were under attack, popped the ring on left. He didn't try to save anyone. He became completely selfish. I think Faramir, he could have told himself, yeah, I'm going to go do this and give this to my father, but maybe on the way, take it for himself. Like, forget my father. This is mine now.
Yeah, if you give it to someone like Gandalf, you're going to eventually get Sauron. If you give it to someone like Frodo, eventually, if it's not destroyed in time, you get someone like Gollum. You were to give it to Aragorn or Faramir, my guess, assuming they lived long enough, Isildur didn't, you would get a new Witch King.
Yeah.
Yep, it corrupts everyone. Faramir in the book, since we're talking about the books, we kind of turn it into conversation about just the ring in general, and this is good. But in the books, the Faramir with Frodo, I think it's a lot better their interaction because you see Frodo's wit, you see his smartness, because Frodo's trying not to let him know exactly who he is and what he's doing. But Faramir is also just as smart, and he's trying to figure out, what are you doing out here? You're not just a traveler looking at Oliphants. I know and Sam.
I'm going to text you. There's this battle of wits going on between us. Right now.
It's Sam who actually gives them up on it.
Right. It's very much like for those of you who don't know, we've been watching a censored version of Game of Thrones recently. There's a storyline where Arya and Tywin, they're together. Tywin knows something's up with Arya. Arya is doing everything she can not to give anything away, but he gets real close, very often. It's a battle of wits as they're together this whole time.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a lot like what it is in the Two Towers, which I find a big disappointment in the movies because that's not there. And to me, Frodo in the movies was always kind of the kid who was always complaining and moaning, and it's like, just give the ring to Sam. That was my thought process. But in the books, you see that Frodo is vastly smarter than Sam. He's way wittier. He's a smart dude. He knows how to speak Elvish. I mean, Robert and I talked about this last podcast, I think, and it's just a shame that I don't think that got across very well in the movies at all.
Right. And it was something that was a mixed bag for me in terms of the depiction of Frodo. I love how in the books he is very smart. He is very proactive. In the books, he falls down a lot, drops his sword. But also in the books, you see the weight, or not in the books, in the movie, you see the weight that the ring has on him. You show a lot more of that emotional corruption that it has on him.
Yeah.
So it's, I appreciate both for what they do. Neither is better for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And once again, it's that argument of how much is breathing too much. How much of it is weeds, how much of it helps the story move along.
I just wish there was one scene, just one scene.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Smart.
And you look at the cartoon, the film, they make Sam so stupid.
Yeah, no, I think that's a sin too.
Yeah. So
make Sam too stupid.
Yeah, so I think it's always an argument how to balance that, So that's something that seems to always be difficult when they're adapting it to film. How smart do you make Frodo? How average do you make Sam? And they seem to make Sam, at least in the films, decent average. But I would agree that Frodo could be a few more steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the film did a really good job of coming across, and I think part of the reason Elijah Wood was hired as Frodo was his eyes.
Yes.
A very big part. It's very blue eyes. He's able to whip up the tears without getting as Billy Boyd and Donahan. I can't remember his name. Dominic Monaghan said that they ugly cry, whereas he can just have tears. No blubbering, no snot. Right. And so because of that, they were able to get across a purity and an innocence for Frodo, which is totally fine for the film.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree that they could have showed his cleverness, especially in those scenes where they're being interrogated. And maybe, while as they get deeper into the conversation, he might just grab the ring under his shirt and then he might say things that are super clever, but kind of dark, maybe a little bit on the harder side where it's like, at first it's just clever banter, but then as he starts to get at Frodo starts to slowly reach up and grab the ring.
It gives him more insight on the character of Faramir, and he starts pressing his weak buttons.
And then Frodo manages to figure out things about him. And he's able to pinpoint, oh, you're Boromir's brother, huh?
Right.
Wouldn't you like to know what he was doing last time I saw him? And poke at his buttons too. That would have made, for me, I think that would have been the best of both worlds there. Because it's innocent and it's like, oh, we're building off something and it's fine. But then as you push my buttons, I'm going to push your buttons because I have the ultimate trump card for pushing buttons.
That's true. Since you brought up the ring, the powers of the ring are even more incredible in the books. In fact, the closer you got to Mordor, if you are holding it, your frame looked more terrifying, which they don't address in the movies, which, to be fair, it's that what's more important, is it more important that it's tempting, or is it more important that you can look? Yeah, that it's a bird. Exactly. So that's another thing that they don't quite adapt completely faithful. But as a viewer, not having read the books, I have to say I do like the burden / temptation that it brings up. Plus, invisibility is really one of the most awesome powers anyone could have.
For sure. But that was another thing where you get the additional depth of it being a burden and a temptation in the books. In the movies, it's more of just temptation, not as much a burden. But there's also in the books, what does the ring do? It makes you an invisible crackhead.
Yep.
In the books, you see how it also gives you the ability to command those who wield rings. It's more of controlling others. It gives you the dominion of Sauron, all that. That's much more thematically relevant. Whereas in the actual plot of the movie, all that's important is that Sauron will become unstoppable if he gets it, and you can turn invisible by putting it on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would like to add as well for what Aaron was just saying, that also special effects wise for doing the whole thing with the ring, they were cutting it pretty high on the budget there.
Yeah.
As is. So that's unnecessary money spent at that point if you're looking at like production value. Just like Sauron's multicolored robes.
Yes.
I don't think we talked about that.
No.
But they that's in the books.
Yeah.
He has a robe of many colors, and Gandalf's like, "Oh, you're right. I didn't notice that."
I didn't see you go from white to many colors.
Yeah, he's just like,
Where did the rainbow come from?
it was so funny because when I was listening to that part of the book, I was just like, Gandalf, how'd you not notice the purple and red flying across this freaking
He
country?
was too high from smoking too much of the Hobbit's pipe weed.
He's just like, man.
Well, if I remember, Christopher Lee actually explains that, is that if you take the color white and bend light through it, you can get many colors, which is Saruman's argument that I'm still justified in what I'm doing because I'm just bending just a little bit of what I'm doing. Instead of destroying the ring and Sauron, I'm just going to use that power to better the world.
I always visually kind of envision it as, it still looks white, but it has kind of a shimmer to it that you might see with certain very fine, like a silken fabric, where it has this kind of rainbow sheen to it. But then the more corrupted he gets, the further he goes down the path, the more it grows until it's just wearing a rainbow.
Yeah, that's kind of how I imagined it, but like with production wise,
I
spent so much money on getting the trolls and the 10,000 orcs ready to deploy.
Yeah.
You know what they should do, since we're talking about Gandalf's meeting with Saruman in the books? If they were to do an extended Fellowship of the Ring, they could add in Radagast, because he's actually the one that tells Gandalf that Saruman wants to see him. And I think it'd be cool. I think the guy they chose for Radagast in the movies was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I actually like that in The Hobbit, Saruman, the way he describes Radagast, he's filthy, he's with animals, blah, 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 blah. Don't remember exactly what he says, but I remember it's very close to how Saruman describes Radagast in Fellowship of the Ring. I was like, oh, that's a cool Easter egg. The more I read from Fellowship of the Ring, the more I was like, oh, so that battle between Sauron and the Ring Wraiths at Dog Guldur and the what do you call it, the White Council, those guys, I was like, that actually happened. They mentioned that in the Fellowship of the Ring. I'm like, oh, so not all of that was made up. So I guess that's a good comparison too, because we are still talking about the Lord of the Rings movies, and The Hobbit kind of fits that.
Yeah, we couldn't fit this in Lord of the Rings, but this did happen in The Hobbit, so
Yeah, and it says it happens before the Battle of right before the Battle of Five Armies, and I was like, they did that in The Hobbit. I was like, oh, that's not that dumb. That actually makes sense. I mean, the movie's still not that good, but it's kind of cool.
It's amazing how close they got in those films. But if it weren't for producers and studios getting involved, it probably would have been maybe not 100% of love, at least for the films, for the Lord of the Rings films, but it would have been pretty dang close.
Yeah, I think Peter Jackson didn't have as much control as he did in the Lord of the Rings movies, because he was working with MGM and
New Line and Warner Brothers.
Just all these companies, and I bet they all wanted their own things, and
they all want a piece of the pie.
So they said, "Oh, you have to add a female elf." Okay, fine. And then another company, you have to make her be in a relationship with somebody. It's like, oh, okay. And it's just like, I don't think he had as much in control. I don't know how true that is. That's just like that's my theory.
That's what I've been figuring.
I will Google it.
Yeah, Robert will Google it. But speaking about female elves, let's talk again about the elves appearing at Helm's Deep, which does not happen in the books, and how they almost put Arwen in Battle's Deep as well.
I think it's a good thing they didn't, because had they, it would have taken away that tension of him not seeing her.
Yeah.
Because that moment when he sees her in Return of the King in the movie, she's hiding behind the banner.
Right.
It's just like the best reveal to him. Like, we knew it was going to happen if you've read the books.
It takes away from Eowyn as well, because we're building up a potential relationship, because we don't know where that's going to go. Because she, as far as we know, in the cut that we see, Arwen's leaving, so he might end up with Eowyn. It's the next best thing. But to have her there would undercut what Eowyn accomplishes in the next film, and building up to her. And we're already established that she wants to be a part of this. So it's like, why don't we make her a part of this as well while we're at it? And then it just becomes a mess.
Right.
Versus, let's take this out and then build up for that moment when Eowyn does what she does. And it's a lot better that way.
Not only that, but why in the world she's staying Rivendell if she could have gone with them the whole time?
Yeah. Why wasn't she a member of the Fellowship?
Yeah.
The 10th member.
Right. I'm actually split on the appearance of elves at Helm's Deep at all. Not just because it was different in the books. For me, the biggest contribution they offer story-wise at Battle of Helm's Deep, they're the cannon fodder, so that we feel no, they're losing because all the elves are dying. But it makes it so that in the world you don't have to pay too big a price. I'm sure some die, but we don't have to see too many.
Right.
Which does make it more believable when a ton of Rohirrim are there for the charge in the third movie, the Ride of Rohirrim. Because if half the Rohirrim die, they're like, wait a second, where are all these guys?
Yeah.
And so it makes that better, but it makes it a little less compelling for me in the Battle of Helm's Deep, because it's like, oh, all these people are dying that we've never met before. Just shut up now.
Yeah. Yes. The good thing about it is they're my favorite expendable army in all 6 of the Tolkien films.
Yeah.
As far as expendable armies go.
Absolutely.
And I agree with what you're saying. The biggest purpose, in my opinion, is to spare the audience watching old men and boys die.
Yeah.
And that's always been what I thought, because
Yeah.
it's getting pretty dark when you're putting a helmet on the kid and the old men are like walking with spears and they can barely hold themselves up. And you're like,
I
man,
got a
these
halberd.
guys, yeah, I got a halberd. We are so dead.
I'm gonna poke him with a stick.
Exactly. So
I agree with
what Jed was saying. It's like, yeah, they're expendable, but at least they serve a purpose to spare the audience the ugly side of war, because it's like they're going to be the ones who they're going to be the ones who would get wiped out, all 1,000 or 2,000 of them.
I think
And they do it with a good purpose, I think. They are expendable. Maybe I don't care as much, but at least they had a purpose and they spared us some ugly stuff.
Yeah, they had a purpose in the movies. I think ever since I watched that and I figured out when I was younger that the elves weren't supposed to be there, I was like, oh, he's just doing his own little battle of 5 armies because he knows he can't do that because he's making Lord of the Rings. So he just wanted to use the elves. That's what I thought as a younger. And then I found out that Eomer never actually got banished by Theoden. So he was at the Battle of Helm's Deep. And so I don't know that it was all old men and young boys. I don't remember reading that. I think there was actually a good force there.
Right.
Just not very many. So
The
the movie,
Eomer's being gone led to a great, finale of the battle, and now we have this great cavalry charge, and they can all live happily ever after until the very next film.
sure, but the movie set itself up so that you would have to have elves
Yeah.
to spare the audience
Yeah.
from seeing old men and young. They did that. They set themselves up for that. I think Peter Jackson just wanted an army of elves. That might just be me, but I'm okay with that he did it. I think it was pretty cool. So
Well, like I said, even with that being said, and that does change things quite a bit if that's the case.
Yeah.
It's still the best expendable army, because we get
sure.
a lot of armies, especially in The Hobbit, where it's like, do I care about you? Especially the elves in The Hobbit. It's like, oh, your people are dying. It's about time. You know?
Yeah, I would say that you do feel for the army of elves, because when the general elf, I don't know his name, when he's dying, when he gets hit on the back of the head, and he just like kills the orc that hit him, and then he's looking around, and he sees all his dead fellow elves. Like, you feel for him, because
It's
he's
an
like,
effective moment.
oh my goodness, I brought my men here to die, and I'm gonna die with them.
And more importantly, it's effective for Aragorn, because that then motivates him to keep going and fight harder.
Whereas the
That's true.
Hobbit does not do that.
No, not even a little bit.
Unfortunately.
Yeah,
Well,
I didn't
and-
see Bard sucker punch an orc off of a ladder.
Yes,
That would have
yes.
been awesome.
And jump with the ladder off
Yeah.
the wall.
Or toss a dwarf. He didn't do
Or
that.
toss the door. Yeah.
There's so many. Why couldn't you have tossed one?
But it also builds off of something that is also not in the book, is the warg attack, which shortens their numbers even more, which makes the battle even more interesting, because it's slowly building up to this death and despair. But then to have the charge of the Rohirrim, it's just clever writing on, what's their names, Philippa and Franz.
Franz Walsh.
Yeah, because without that tension, then there is in the book, from the little I've read, but I do think for a viewing audience, it makes sense. Let's build up this huge battle. And we've just had this huge talk from Gimli saying, these aren't regular orcs, these are really big, mean, nasty. And they prove that, and they have a bomb. So it's just, I think it's good storytelling, even though it's very different. Well, not very, but enough different from what's in the books that it keeps the audience engaged. So that when you go back to Frodo and Sam or Merry and Pippin, it allows you to breathe for just a moment, which is good storytelling.
I'm glad you brought up the wargs, because I think that's one of the most underestimated fight scenes in the whole trilogy, or at least talked about. And I loved it. Even as a kid, we watched the first DVD, the extended edition, and I was like, I can't wait to get to the second part, which opens up with the flashbacks and all that. But then we get to the wargs. And I always loved that, and I thought it was a great action scene. You know, have Aragorn going over the cliff. Pretty sure he didn't in the book.
No.
But all those things, you know, these guys are mortal. They can get hurt. You know, at any time, anyone could die. You know, it added to the mortality of things, and also just the logistics of having guys on horses versus guys on these giant hyenas.
Mhm.
And the humor with Gimli bench pressing like three of them off of him. Great moments, great stuff, which is why it's so disappointing that in Battle of the Five Armies, there's like zero, there's like one ward we see, and then the rest of the time, after the build-up.
Yeah.
We always go back to the Battle of the Five Armies.
Because it's so disappointing.
Here, I got the producers form. Speaking of which, so the producing companies was Wingnut for Lord of the Rings, was Wingnut Films, New Line Cinema, Saul Zant's company. I think that's how you say that. And for The Hobbit, it was Warner Brothers and MGM, New Line Cinema, Wingnut. So I think those two big ones, Warner Bros. And MGM, they like to take over movies.
Especially
So
if we all the DC films.
Yeah.
Warner Brothers, either they do a great job or they do too
Bomb it.
much.
Warner Brothers. Wait, you can't blow up Krypton. How's he gonna go back?
We could talk for hours about that. That's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
Probably best for us to move on those. We're not here for the length of Lord of the Rings. So.
Yeah.
They opened that.
The extended edition.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Moving on to Return of the King, I think really there's only two notable ones in my eyes. You know, it's been a while since I've read them, so correct me if I'm wrong. The opening of Return of the King, you know, with Frodo and Sam and Gollum.
Yeah.
That's all taken from Two Towers. It takes up until about halfway through to actually reach where they were at the beginning of Return of the King in the book.
Yeah.
And the other big change is the ending. They took out the scouring of the Shire at the very end. For those of you who don't know, Gandalf survived, or not Gandalf, I mean, Gandalf does survive. Saruman survives. He's exiled, he goes away, and he takes Wormtongue and he says, "For you hobbits, I'm going to take over and destroy your home." And so when they go home, they see that it's a mess. They kick him out, and Wormtongue kills him, and he gets shot just like in the movies, or the extended edition, anyways.
Yeah.
You know, Return of the King is the shortest of the three books, and most of it is appendices. So because of that, they were able to, with some cutting stuff out, they were still able to keep it pretty perfect to what was in the books. A little bit of cutting out, a little bit of compressing, but even then, it was still the longest movie.
Yeah. The big thing with that is perspective, whether you like the scouring of the Shire or not. Aaron, Brendan, and I, a man in our church, he invited us to watch it at his home because he had two daughters. He didn't have any sons that he could enjoy it with, so it was kind of a favor for him. And it was it's a very long day when you watch three extended films. I didn't want to, for the first time in my life, I didn't want to watch TV. It was long. I love those films, but it was long. Regardless, he was in favor of the scouring of the Shire, and I thought, wow, that's such a dour and depressing ending. And I was talking to my dad about it after we did that, and he's like, you got to come at it from his perspective. He's a war veteran. I'm pretty sure he served in Afghanistan. So his perspective was, it was about the heroes coming home to a home that didn't appreciate you, and they got to prove themselves and show, hey, we've been through some stuff. Obviously, as we talked last time, Frodo got ostracized because of his mercy, but the rest of them got to show what they're made of and show what they're capable of and be helpful to their communities, which is probably something this guy wanted in his own life. It's like, I wish I came home from Afghanistan and I could show what I'm made of and help people. And the way I was trained, versus the rest of us with Peter Jackson, where it's like, I'd like the whole point, according to Peter Jackson, is to save the Shire.
Yeah.
And they talk about it throughout the series. It's like, we gotta save the Shire. We gotta go back to the Shire. Yeah, we gotta go back to the running rivers and everything else, the taste of strawberries, all the nice things. And the Shire does represent everything that's lovely in the world of Middle Earth, in the film specifically. So to have them go back and it's they've scoured the Shire. It's like, man, that's pretty rough.
I just love the book how when they get there, Gandalf's with them and he's like, and somehow he knows, I don't remember, but he knows that the Shire's been taken over and things have been burned. He's like, you guys got this. I'm gonna go talk to Tom Bombadil, and he leaves them.
They're like, but Gandalf.
But no, the hobbits are cool with it too. They're like, oh my gosh, these guys are gonna be like a cakewalk through the city.
They're like, oh, I just read the One Ring. Come on, bring
And
it in.
Merry and Pippin are the leaders. They're tall. They're super tall hobbits because they drink that hens juice.
Which in the extended
Hens
movie,
juice
that's
sounds weird.
hilarious.
Yes, very funny scene.
So I think I really liked that part in the book because it didn't feel so much of a downer. I mean, it was sad because the hobbits had died and they had to regrow some trees. But with that, Sam had gotten magical seeds or something from Galadriel, and he planted these seeds he got for her to replace all the trees that had gotten burned.
Yeah, it's a great victory for him.
And I think it was just the next spring they were all just as big as the trees that were there.
Yeah.
So it's like she somehow knew that was going to happen, or maybe it's just coincidence, whatever.
The Discovery of Galadriel very much was inspired by Tolkien's coming home from World War I. Both the home can never be the same after what you've been through, but also loved nature so much, comes back, and Britain has been industrialized for the war machine. And he understood it, but he hated it. And so I love it in the book. I love it thematically. If it was a TV series and it could be its own episode, it might be one of my favorite episodes.
No,
But just in terms of the pacing of a movie, after the incredible climax that is the Battle of Pelennor Fields, leading up to the bigger climax of the destruction of the Ring and the Battle of Blackgate, to then say, we have to fight a guy and like 30 men.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a, okay, why are we spending time on this?
yeah, it's a lot like how in Stardust, just to jump to that story randomly.
Right.
At the beginning, you see the character Daredevil, the actor for Daredevil. He's kind of a wimp, and he's a simp for this woman, and he just will do anything for her. An actor for Superman, I don't remember other names in the movies. Henry Cavill.
Yeah.
He's got this woman's heart already, and then this wimp. This Daredevil goes on this journey throughout the movie. He learns to fight. He gets longer hair. He dresses more
He
fashion.
goes on adventures, he becomes a man.
He comes back and he beats Henry Cavill. Well, he beats him before the fight even starts.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of how I felt when I read the books.
Yeah.
Because when the hobbits get back to Hobbiton and it's taken over, they knock on the door and they're like, "Hey, let us in." And the guys that are in charge, the evil men, they're just like, "It's after hours. You're not allowed to come in." They're like, "Whatever." And they kick down the door and they go, and they don't take these guys seriously. They're not afraid of anything. And it's really cool to see that in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's probably going back to what this guy was, why he probably preferred it over the actual ending in the film.
Yeah. I haven't read any of the Scouring of the Shire, but there's a moment in the movie where they're all sitting at a table and they all have their mugs and they all kind of do a silent toast. And I really remembered that moment because we discussed it on my mission. We all knew, in case you don't know what a mission is, for our church, we go and spread the gospel of Jesus Christ to different corners of the earth, proselyting. And the reason we brought that scene up is we all knew when we would go back home, that's how it was going to feel, is that we will have seen things and experienced people of different faiths and non-faiths, and just to have that moment of clarity, for me, especially, I was like, yeah, that's going to be me. You know, it's not as tough, nearly as tough as what veterans go through, but you did feel that significant change. So,
Comparable in nature, not in scope.
exactly. So, I know for each of us in the group here, we've all served mission. We all kind of had that moment where we're like, yeah, we're changed from what we've experienced. So while they don't have the scouring of the Shire, they do acknowledge that the experiences that each of the four hobbits go through has left them changed for the better, hopefully. You know, we discover with Frodo, he can never go back to how things were. And we talked about that in the last video, but I still like how they handled it in the movies. I'll have to read the Scouring of the Shire to see if I like it or not. Brendan's saying it's good though.
I think for the movie they did the right choice.
Yeah.
It gives a great victory to the Sackville Baggins, Lobelia Sackville Baggins, who are barely touched upon in the films.
Yeah.
But in the books, it's a great quasi redemption for not a character who did was a bad person, did bad things, but an annoying, oh, they're not so bad, I like them now.
Yeah. I think in the book it's a matter of tying up loose ends.
Yeah.
Versus the film, it would have been anticlimactic.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with once that
Done.
The changing medium,
Yeah.
necessitates different changes. That's why it's adaptation, not translation.
exactly. So yeah, it's just a matter of how did I put it?
Tying up loose ends.
Tying up loose ends versus being anticlimactic.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I like that. I think it could have worked if they
They
made
set
a
it
fourth
up.
movie.
well,
Make the third movie about him destroying the ring and rescuing the. I don't know. Maybe it'd be too hard.
yeah,
But
A little short film.
But the problem, I don't think they could have done it because they, like Jed said earlier, they were playing catch up because they were doing things from the second book in the third movie.
Yeah.
So they were playing catch up in a way that they couldn't add that saving the side.
Everything with Aragorn and Legolas and all of those characters, that's the same as in the book. But Frodo and Sam, there's a lot of catch up.
And they do acknowledge that in the special features is how they were going to split up the second book. They said it was the hardest one to do because they're like, how do you keep the pacing good? Because in the books it works better, but because they had to jump from story to story to story, because there's three stories, which you normally shouldn't do that in your second book. You can get away with it in the third book, but in your second book, you generally have one or two points of view. But this has three. You got balance Merry and Pippin, you got balance Frodo and Sam and Gollum, and then Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn. So you can understand from a movie making point of perspective, it's going to be really hard to balance all that.
Yeah. I don't see how they could do it. But one thing, if we can jump to a different scene for a second here. One thing they put in the movies that wasn't in the books was when Arwen kills the Witch King. She does say, I am no man in the book and all that. She kills him and stabs him in the face. Spot on. Perfect. But in the movies, she sees her father and he sees her and they have a little talk and then he dies. Her uncle, my bad. I'm sorry. Don't cancel me. And then, but in the book, I'm pretty sure she fainted before ever seeing him, and he dies not knowing she was ever there.
And in the book, she also says, I am no man before they fight. It makes the Witch King a little uncertain what's going to happen here. Whereas in the movie, it's safe to the end for the big climactic moment.
Yes, I think for the movie, I really like that because it's really cool. It's really like girl power and all that, but it's like, oh, this is cool.
It also ups the tension throughout the fight.
Yeah.
He's this unstoppable Terminator of Middle Earth.
But as soon as she has the upper hand, this is my one-liner, wench.
Yeah, because the film does a great job of setting him up. First, he's commanding the whole army. They suit him up. That's a great scene. He kicks Gandalf's trash in the extended edition, breaks his staff. He's a bad dude. She kills his beast And he just hops off and looks at her like, really? And then he pulls out his giant mace, and it's like this big. That's a great story, how they got to that. We'll talk about that later. But he has that big mace, and she's just like, oh. And then he beats the crud out of her. Mary stabs him, like in the book, I'm pretty sure. There's some logistics about whether it's a magic blade or not in the film. It is in the book, as far as I understand. And then she says, I am no man, because she's confident now, versus, it's sort of like the Aragorn reversal, where it's like she's confident before in the book, but she's confident at the end of that fight.
Yeah.
In the
Look, she's
movie.
like trash talking him.
I don't know if it's better or worse, but it's certainly more cinematic.
Yeah, it works really good on the screen, as if she was just like super confident. It's like, well, he's not much of a threat, but in the movie, he's very much a threat. He's scary.
I wonder why Tolkien did not want or didn't have her see her uncle as she was dying. I wonder if he thought that he would be mad at her or whatever. But I really like how the movie handled it, because it's like he knew. He's like, I knew you would come. You know,
Right.
Deep down, I kind of knew. When he was bleeding out, and he's like, that's not really her, but
His experience from being on the battlefield, just knowing, oh, I know how big those are, I know how low the odds of them crossing paths would be. So it's just an issue of him saying, oh, we don't need that. Whereas in the movies, it's possible for them to cross paths. They can give the emotional impact. Let's do it.
well, yeah. And he was about to get killed, so she went there to save him. So the odds increased. I believe that. That's what made it believable to me.
They're smart in the film because he gets surrounded by orcs, and she sees that and begins to fight alongside him. So immediately, wherever he is, she's going to be working to protect him, which is really cool. And he sees her protecting him, not knowing it's her.
Well, that's in the extended edition.
Right, in the
Theatrical
extended
edition, they both see the Felbeast swooping down.
Yeah.
It goes after him. She rushes in because, oh crap, that's bad.
If you haven't watched the extended edition, please do it.
Yes.
Because that's what I'm going to reference.
The theatrical version is also worth watching. I prefer the extended edition.
Yeah.
But there are differences that are notable for both the craft and editing, but also, if you're just starting, I usually recommend the theatrical before it's
Yeah.
extended.
Unless you like binging,
Yeah.
you should start with the theatrical. But if you can binge 9 episodes on Netflix that are like 50 minutes long, you can do the extended edition.
Can you watch the Snyder Cut?
Yeah, the Snyder Cut.
In one sitting. This would be easy compared to that.
Yeah, the
Yeah, I had a hard time watching the extended cut.
Snyder Cut.
The Snyder cut compared to Lord of the Rings. I'm like, no, don't do it, Aragorn. The Snyder cut. I'm like, I got work.
I think this is our officially our longest episode ever. Before we sign off, are there any things that anyone else wanted to add? Things that we liked, changes that we liked, changes that we didn't like, anything else?
Just lastly, going off what we were just saying, Theoden, his death scene, one of my favorite death scenes. I touched on it last one of the other episodes. It's really well done. Him talking about his redemption, how he can finally rest with his fathers with peace of mind, and he's worthy of them. Excellent piece of scene, excellent dialogue, excellent acting on both their parts, and I think it was just a really beautiful scene. It's a shame that they didn't have that interaction that Brittany was talking about.
I think that'd be really cool. Yeah. No, but I would say just as a final kind of thought, when I was listening to the books, I had seen the extended movies beforehand. I actually watched some of the other ones, the theatrical cut. So when I was listening to the books, to me that was like the extended edition with author's notes. So for me it was a super cool experience, and I recommend it to anyone who likes the films. I recommend listening to it if you have a hard time understanding just Tolkien's writings, because they get kind of confusing. I recommend listening, reading, whatever you can do. It's really quite a cool experience. And I think that overall the films capture the spirit of the books, which is the brotherhood that the fellowship shares between each other, and just overcoming the impossible, and the reality of evil in the world, and the reality of temptation to fall for the evil. So that's kind of my view of it. There's a lot of stuff we missed with the books and movies, but can't go on forever. So yeah, that's kind of my say on that.
What are your thoughts, Robert?
I would say that Lord of the Rings is a great example of how to do a book to a movie.
Might be the best adaptation ever.
Yeah, I mean,
Possibly, yeah.
in my personal opinion, it is for all the movies I watch, and I love the Harry Potter movies. Just throwing that out there. But Lord of the Rings, they do a good job at still giving the fans of the book what they want.
Ooh, are we doing Harry Potter next month?
I don't know. That's Jed. He's the director.
We may touch on it. We'll see.
I'd like to do an episode like this.
We're gonna do a whole episode just on Slytherin. Slytherin's better than you.
I know it.
Gryffindor, yo.
Yes, that is my final point.
No, but just as my final thought, I've tried to read the books in the past, but usually the movies just pop into my head. And that's how you can tell if it's a pretty good adaptation, is if the story in the books matches what you see on screen. And it does that a lot. And it makes me love the work that people put into the films even more. And we're just hoping that that same passion is for the show that's coming out, the Rings of Power. So
Time will tell.
only time will tell.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
I think that's it. So next week, tune in. We will be discussing. We haven't decided yet. We'll discuss what we will be discussing next week.
It'll be a surprise.
But in the meantime, we are actually moving to a slightly different time. Robert, you want to fill our audience in on that?
Because I'm so terrible at coming in at 6:30, we talked about going up to 7 o'clock. We need our second dinner. Actually, how was it? What was it? Dinner, supper, and afternoon or some tea? No.
I don't remember.
Anyways, Google it. You can find all the Hobbit meals on Google. I found that out recently through a meme. Anywho, I have dinner pretty late, so that's part of the reason why I was late. I had to have my panda, guys. So we're moving to 7 o'clock. That was a long way to get around to saying 7 o'clock, everybody.
Yeah. Like, comment, subscribe. Share this with your friends, and tune in next time as we will broadcast at 7 o'clock today. All right.
Thanks for watching, guys.
Yep. Here we go. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.